Okay, good Erev Shabbos, folks. So what does that actually mean, like Tachlis? What does that mean to me on an Erev Shabbos when there's no Eruv, or if I'm in an area or I have to pass through an area where there's no Eruv? So just a few reminders. This is an opportunity to rethink what we're doing and our responsibilities. And that is, obviously we can't be carrying in an area where there is no Eruv. So south of Broadway in our area of Lawrence, that affects a lot of people. In fact, us, our house is not in the Eruv. But just a few reminders, the things that perhaps it's easy to forget. A few things which are allowed. You're allowed to carry anything which you're wearing. So for instance, I'm allowed to wear my clothes, I'm allowed to wear my watch, I'm allowed to wear my glasses. That's not considered carrying. The poets can even say one's allowed to wear a reflector belt if that's something which is important to a person walking at night on an area without sidewalks. When it comes to safety, we will be providing at shul masks, gloves and hand sanitizer. One should not be carrying hand sanitizer on Shabbos. However, if one wants to bring one's own mask or gloves, one can bring that to shul, but only wearing it the entire time. One will be able to wear one's mask or one's glove to shul in the area where there is no Eruv. If you do not feel comfortable that way, we do have masks and gloves at every single minyan. Bringing your talis to shul, good idea maybe to drop off your talis on Erev Shabbos now ahead of time if you want to use it in shul on Shabbos. That being said, a person may wear their talis, but that means to say that the talis needs to be worn the entire time in an area where there is no Eruv. We will be uncovering our Sidurim and Chumashim for the first time since the beginning of reopening. That means to say that you will be able to use our Siddur and Chumashim. You do not need to carry it. If you feel more comfortable using yours, please make sure to drop it off on Erev Shabbos if you're in an area which does not have an Eruv. You do not need to bring water bottles. We'll be providing water bottles outside each of the minyanim on Shabbos, so please don't worry about that. Do not bring them. The concern about being hydrated does not override the need not to carry in an Eruv. It's important to realize that. When it comes to kids and the elderly, so transportation, those who need to be in wheelchairs, kids and strollers, every situation is very, very different, completely different needs. There are many rules, but they apply very differently in certain circumstances. Specifically regarding the elderly, please call up if there is a specific question in this regard as well. It's also important to realize that when it comes to walking the dog, Rabbi Ribiat points out that one is allowed to walk one's dog under a few conditions. One is that the leash may not touch the ground, will not be touching the ground at tefach, a handbreadth, and also the dog cannot be the kind of dog that's straining against you, that you have to keep pulling it. You're not allowed to move a pet, you're allowed to walk a pet, and the leash is considered part of its malbush, its natural gear, what it carries naturally. However, you would not be able to drag it, or it would not be able to, the leash should not be on the ground. Now the interesting question comes is, what about my yard? Surely I can carry my own yard. I know my house is certainly my domain. What about my yard? Not so simple. Let's take a quick look at the opportunity of just doing a quick chazara with Rabbi Gavriel Bechhofer, who wrote a book on Eruvin, just to do a quick revision. I thank him for his time, and let's take a quick look. Join me as well. We'll take a look at an example of Chet and Leslie Eisen's backyard and get a sense of what we should be thinking of before we start the Shabbos. Join me. Okay, folks, good Erev Shabbos. Just wanted to, so I'm here right in front of the Eisen's household. The Eisen's, Baruch Hashem, celebrated a beautiful simcha this week where Tara got married to Penny Wasa. Baruch Hashem, they're celebrating Sheva Brachos, and they asked me to come over and take a look at the backyard. Why the backyard? Because here's something really important to think about. We know the Eruv is down, but what does that mean to us on a practical level? It means a lot of things. You see, there's a misnomer. We think that private property, if this is legally my property, I can show you the title, I can show you the deed to my property, that means it's private property. Not so in halacha. If you look at the Mishnayos and you look at the Gemara and the halacha, it needs to be for it to be a private property, it needs to be personally owned, but it also needs to be circumscribed by a fence of more than 10 tefachim. That fence can have gaps in it, but those need to be especially indicated as entrances. How do we do that? Let's take a quick look over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this as a typical house, and we're going to take a look around the property and get a sense of what we should be doing, what we should not be doing in our own front and backyards. Now, I'm going to take you with me as we go. So let's take a look over here. Now you'll notice in a front yard in America specifically, and I'm going to say this America because I came from South Africa where everybody has fences around their front yards. So security, people say, how can you live like that? But for Eruv, that's actually pretty good. Here when you have an average property which has a front lawn, there's no fence over here. So if there's no fence, that means to say that that does not constitute a Rishus Hayachid, a private domain. You could not be carrying. What that means is that just practically speaking, when you're coming on a Shabbos, you cannot put your key under your front mat. You cannot take in the newspaper. Those are not, that is a semi-private domain, a semi-public domain, and you may not take from that into your private domain. So that being the case, it's important if you're going to be using a key in an area which doesn't have an Eruv, to put it on the back, under the back mat to carry it into the house, because you cannot carry it from your front porch into your house necessarily, unless your front porch is a Rosh Hashanah, which in many cases it is not. Let's take a quick look around the side of the house over here. We'll start on the easier side. Okay, so that we're not going to try not to interrupt the planning for the Simcha which is going on over here, but let's just take a quick look over here. So here we have it. So we have the front wall of the house is certainly a wall, so you can certainly carry within your house. It's circumscribed on all four sides. What about the back? So here we are actually very lucky. We have a fence, and the fence has a gate. This is totally fine. This acts as a complete mechitza, as its own area. You'll notice over here there's a little bit of a wall, and it moves along to this area of bushes. These bushes are contiguous. That means to say they are 10 tvachim tall, which is a necessity. That's about 35 inches plus from the ground. And there's no gaps of more than 4 tvachim, roughly 13 inches. So you can see it's pretty contiguous. This could act as a mechitza, which means that the private domain actually starts right over here from this gate all the way in. Along this fence, this would all be allowed. You would be allowed to carry over here. This is all acting as a fence. We carry on going, and as you can see, it's pretty much the foliage is almost 100% continuous. So we really have no issues along the side over here, and that goes all the way. And we really have to check. You have to check if there's gaps. If there's a gap of more than 4 inches from foliage which is below 35 inches, you may have an issue. We'll get there in a second. So this is pretty contiguous, as you can see. It goes to the back over here. Everything is pretty, even over there in the back, is pretty continuous. It'll act as a fence to create the Rishus Hayachid. Similarly over here, and we get to the back fence, even better. We have a fence. Fence is above 35 inches high. Even though it's got gaps in it, those holes are inconsequential when it comes to acting as a mechitza. And we have a fence going along over here. So far, we have the front of the house acting as our one wall. The side of the house is bushes all the way. Now we have a fence with bushes along over here. So we have 3 sides which are good. Now what about the 4th side? This is where it just becomes interesting. So here we are. Let's take a look over here. As you can see, so we have the back of the house over here, and we have the property next door. Between us and the property next door are a number of gaps. So that is going to be a problem. This cannot act as a mechitza, as a wall to circumscribe this property. So what do we need to do in this case? Here's the rule. If we have a gap which is above 12, 13 inches, which is 4 tvachim, but below 15 feet, the way we can work this out is with what's called a lechi. A lechi essentially is a doorpost which we're putting in. A door, it can be of any size. It can be really a small thing. Actually, Chet has a great example. Chet, do you want to show it just quickly? We're just going to put a show in how we're going to do this. We need to put a doorpost essentially on either side of the gap. Okay, if that's between 12 inches and 15 feet, it's beyond 15 feet, you need to have those 2 poles, and you need to ride a string along the top of them, what's called a tzuras pesach. So Chad actually just picked up some great lechis in Lowe's over here. These are fantastic. So this is great. So what we're going to do is like this. So let's say a gap over here. Let's take a look at this gap over here. So we have a couple gaps here. Number one is between these 2 bushes. So like probably a good idea would be just to, let's see if we can get like let's say one of these right next to the bush over here. So if we're putting it in over here, so let's say we're looking at putting it on the one side of this bush, right? So we have it over here. As long as it's 35 inches above the ground, it's right next to the area which is a barrier. And then we're going to put another one. It's a little hard to get in, but we're going to have another one on the other side over here. So essentially, next to the one bush where there's a gap, next to the other bush, essentially what we're framing it is that this is no longer a break in the mechitz. This is now signified as being a door post, essentially, on either side. Again, if the gap is between 4 tvachim and 10 amos, which is 13 inches and 15 feet, one of these on either side would be sufficient to create the, so to speak, the door frame as opposed to just a broken fence. Okay, so we'll have on the other side over here, so if we just put it over here like such as you have it over there before, just thanks for being a part of the demonstration. This is perfect. So we have it over here, and this is a great example of a tzuras pesach now. So we have actually shtei lechayim. I apologize. So we essentially have a pole on either side of the gap. That's sufficient. Now this demarcates it that even though there's a gap in our fence, this is no longer a gap in the fence. This is essentially an entranceway. You can have as many entranceways as you want in a fence. And we're going to do that similarly for all the other smaller gaps. What's interesting over here is that let's say you have a gap which is bigger than 15 feet. So this is actually just under this gap between the tree and the next bush over here is a gap of 13 feet. But let's say it would be 15 feet. We'd actually have to put a lechi on the one side, a lechi on the other side, and run a string along the top of them between the two to create that. That would create more of a, because it's a bigger gap, it's hard to see this is actually an entrance. You need to actually frame it as an entranceway. And that would be the way all the way along. One would have to do this all the way along to the front of the house. So either it'd be a double lechi over here and by this tree. Again, there's another smaller gap by the tree and the tree. And over here, this tree doesn't need to because it's right next to a bush. It's pretty consecutive. It's pretty contiguous. Yeah, there may be another need for another one over here. What we could do is essentially make a lechi over here by this tree and run it to the side of the house, which means that the house would be act as the front entrance, as the front wall. So we have a wall in the front of the house. We have the other side, which is all bushed out. Then we have the back entrance, which is a fence, and then we have along over here where we've just made a few entranceways just to ensure that this is a continuous fence. The reason why it's important to think about these things is because if you just assume that you can carry on your property, that may not necessarily be the case. Our backyards, as an example, this is a great backyard because now we really only have one side that we had to really deal with. If we have a fence around the entire back of the property, that's fine. Well, we just need to think about when it comes to the front of the house, how that looks like in terms of connecting the wall of the house to the side of the fence. If there's a gate there or a gateway, that's fine. If not, we're essentially making a gateway by putting two lechis, two side posts on either side to signify that. So that's just the basics in terms of this. And it's again important to remember in terms of bringing in the newspaper is an issue from the front yard if there's no fence in the front, or bringing the key in from under the mat is a problem in the house. One would have to put the key under the back mat and not bring in the newspaper if it is dropped in the front of the yard.